Today we celebrate the first Sunday of Lent, entering once again into the penitential season of the Church. And this period, every single year, is very important for the Church and for ourselves, because it's a time that we are supposed to take a look at ourselves in order to renew and intensify our efforts to fight against our own sinful inclinations, to combat our vices. A time that we're to enter into a training ground in order to discipline our desires and to grow in holiness, in parallel to the time that Christ spent 40 days in the desert being tempted and attacked by the devil. And this time, when we look at ourselves, when we look at our fallen nature, when we look at our failings in the moral life, the Church, for centuries, has divided our struggle against sin into three main categories. And they have given this threefold category the name the Threefold concupiscence. And the Threefold concupiscence is the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And this threefold category is supposed to give us a systematic way of looking at ourselves in order to help us recognize where we need to grow and what we need to work on. First, the lust of the eyes. This has to do with our inordinate desire for things, material things, possessions, forms of entertainment, technology. This is a very difficult one for American Catholics because we live in a first world country where literally everything we could ever want is at our fingertips. We can have whatever we want delivered to our doorstep. Everything we want in America is available. Not being content with what is sufficient or necessary, but always looking for the new hotness, the new iPhone, the latest high-def television, the newest cars. Humanity always struggles with this temptation of becoming attached to material things, where they are no longer tools for mankind or even forms of entertainment, but they become obsessions and addictions. The second form of disorder that we fight against is the lust of the flesh. And this has to do with our desires for comfort and for pleasure. Now, there's nothing wrong with comfort or pleasures in themselves, as long as they are enjoyed correctly and we don't allow them to control us. For example, eating good food, drinking alcohol, being able to relax, the marital act between a husband and wife, all good things God has created and given to man. But we have a tendency to misuse them, to not use them correctly, to allow them to control us, to absorb us, and lead us into sin. And then the third disorder that we fight against, that third category, the pride of life. And this has to do with our self-will. That inordinate desire of ourselves that we just want to do what we want to do, no matter what that is, regardless of the effect that it has on others or ourselves, wanting to be independent of God and dispensed of his moral law, which is supposed to guide our nature. We want to be our own lawmakers. We want to be separate and independent of God. I shouldn't have to listen to him. I shouldn't have to obey him. I should be able to do whatever I want to do. This is my life, and I should be able to decide what I want to do with my life. This sin is as old as Adam and Eve. The desire to rebel against God's divine will and to be independent of him. This threefold disorder, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, every human person struggles with and must fight against because of our fallen nature. But the Church has given us three things to fight against these disorders, to correct them. And I am sure that you have heard of them before, but you may not be aware that they are actually in direct opposition to our threefold concupiscence. And they're supposed to be corrective measures of these disorders. And that threefold remedy is prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. First, almsgiving is supposed to fight against the lust of the eyes, that disordered temptation to get things for ourselves and to be self-focused. Now, a lot of people think that almsgiving is about giving money. This is actually not the case, and it's a very common misconception, because not everyone has money to give. The word alms in the English language has commonly taken on this idea of money, but it actually comes from the Greek word eleemosune, which means pity or mercy. So literally, to give alms means to give pity or to be merciful. And this is why from the very beginning, the Church has always considered almsgiving to be the 7 corporal and the 7 spiritual works of mercy. Feeding the hungry, visiting the sick, clothing the naked, instructing the ignorant, praying for the living and the dead. This is almsgiving because it's not directed toward getting what we want, but directed towards others. It's not self-focused, but other-focused. And so it keeps in check that lust of the eyes, that desire to gratify ourselves, because the 7 corporal and spiritual works of mercy are directed towards what others need and not what we want. The second is fasting, which fights against that lust of the flesh, that desire for comfort and pleasure. By abstaining from things that we enjoy, we discipline our appetites for pleasure, which means that we don't allow pleasurable things to control and influence our actions. So, for example, fasting from alcohol or fasting from food or different types of food that we like. Another type of fast can be fasting from hot showers, the comfort that that brings, or fasting from music that we like, or fasting from forms of entertainment, such as TV shows or movies. By abstaining from things that we enjoy, we train our minds and our bodies to be able to say no to pleasure. So that way, when the temptation for pleasurable things at some point entice us to sin, we are able to turn away from it and not allow it to control us. And then the final remedy is prayer. And this fights against the pride of life, that disordered desire to do what I want to do. Because prayer, when we pray, we have to humble ourselves. We have to direct our minds and our hearts to God, which constantly remind us that we need Him, that we wouldn't exist without Him, that we wouldn't be redeemed without Him, that we need God and are always dependent on Him for everything we have. Prayer directs our wills to God so that we will stop seeking our own inordinate will, but we will finally start to conform ourselves to the divine. These 3 remedies of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, they fight and combat our corrupted nature, our fallen nature. Now, every Lent, for the most part, Catholics will give something up, like sweets or candy. And that's great for children. But it's time that we take it to the next level, okay? We have to take our Lent to the next level. And the way we do this is we don't just do one thing for Lent. We always do 3 things for Lent. And the way we pick what 3 things those are is we pick one from each of those categories of that threefold remedy of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So this way, we take a holistic approach to healing our entire person. We address all of our disorders simultaneously. For example, almsgiving, looking at the 7 corporal and spiritual works of mercy, picking one from the list to incorporate into our Lenten practice. One of these things can be volunteering at a food bank or a shelter. This would be just like feeding the hungry. Or we can give some of our things to those locations that provide for the needy and provide for the poor as part of clothing the naked. Or we could pray a Divine Mercy Chaplet every single day for our deceased ancestors, praying for the dead, helping the souls in purgatory get to heaven. And after we pick one of these, we then see what we can fast from. So, if I struggle with alcohol, forego that for Lent. If I spend too much time on YouTube, cut yourself off. Unless you're watching Father Mercy homilies, of course, and then it's okay. Although some of our homilies may be considered Lenten penances, but I'll let you decide. Another fast that has been suggested by the Church for centuries has been sexual abstinence between husband and wife during the time of Lent. I would highly recommend this as well. Then after this, we go to prayer to see what we incorporate into our Lenten practice, a prayer to help us focus ourselves on God, like praying the Litany of Humility every day, or the Litany to the Sacred Heart. One prayer I would suggest is the Serenity Prayer, a beautiful prayer that is all about abandoning yourself to God's divine providence, to His divine will. Pick one of these things, these prayers, to incorporate into your Lenten practice. This way, we are fighting against our fallen and corrupted nature. We are fighting entirely against it with prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Now, I realize that we are already half a week into Lent. But if your Lenten practices that you've already decided on don't follow this threefold structure, I would highly encourage you to change it. Better late than never. This is not my formula for success. This is the formula of the saints who have succeeded into getting where we are supposed to be. And none of us are where we are supposed to be. The saints have given us a systematic way of fighting against our lust of the eyes, our lust of the flesh, our pride of life, fighting against our corruption and growing in holiness. We need to take our Lent seriously, right? Lent is an important time for us, and it's important because it's time to renew our efforts in looking at ourselves, growing in holiness, and growing in virtue. St. Francis de Sales, one of the great doctors of the Church, had once said, "You are either advancing on the battlefield or you are in retreat. There is no standing your ground. You are either advancing and you are growing in holiness, or you are digressing. There is no standing still. If we have reached a point in our life where we are standing still, then we're not standing still, but we're actually going backwards. We need to be proactive in being intentional about rooting out sin and vice in our lives, no matter how small it may seem. St. Paul tells us that he drove and trained his body like an athlete in order to win that crown that is imperishable, that crown that does not fade. And he did this out of fear, that he would lose his prize if he let his body have free rein. It's time to take Lent to the next level. Let this Lent be fruitful for us. Let this Lent be something that bears the greatest fruit that we've never experienced before. Today is a new day. Last Lent, put it out of your mind. This Lent is the present. This is when we can grow. This is when we can advance on the battlefield. Advance on that battlefield so that one day we might be victorious.